Now it's time to look at the week ahead, and we're joined by a journalist from one of the oldest newspapers in the world, Laura Patel of The Times, and one of the newest arrivals to what used to be Fleet Street. It's Jim Waterson of BuzzFeed. BuzzFeed is one of the fastest growing news sites thanks to items such as which Hunger Games character are you and 50 puppies to help you get through work today. But they do political news too, and so in a tribute to the site, here's our look at the week ahead in the style of BuzzFeed. With tensions still high in Crimea, the Prime Minister will make a statement this afternoon on the situation in Ukraine. Also today, the Care Bill is back in the Commons. A vote on plans to give greater power to the Health Secretary to close hospital apartments will take place later in the week. And former Prime Minister Gordon Brown will today outline 6 constitutional reforms as a positive alternative to Scottish independence. Tomorrow, Universities Minister David Willetts will announce a UK contribution of over £200 million to 3 major European space projects. Also on Tuesday, the Governor of the Bank of England appears before the Treasury Select Committee, where he'll be asked about a currency union with an independent Scotland. On Wednesday, it's the weekly bout of Prime Minister's Questions, and Thursday sees Conservative Party conference. Well, let's hope our guests are still there. Yes, they are, Laura, and still awake. Let's talk about tax. Laura, how much of an issue is the fact that more people are being caught up in the 40p tax bracket?
Well, it's certainly something that's getting Tory MPs very animated. They feel that there have been tax cuts for lower paid people because George Osborne raised the threshold, in conjunction with the Liberal Democrats, the threshold up before which people must pay basic rate tax. And more people have been sucked into this upper rate, and the Conservatives consider those people their core voters. These are people earning £30,000, £40,000, £50,000. I think that they have to be a little bit careful because sometimes they talk about the squeezed middle, and we have to remember that those people aren't necessarily the middle. The average income in the UK is about £25,000, £26,000. So they have to be a little bit careful with their language, but that's what it's all about. It's going after those people, maybe doctors, train drivers, people who are in the middle bracket who could get sucked into that rate. Right.
Well, I mean, one idea that was put forward certainly at the weekend, Jim, is that scrapping the 40p tax rate, lowering the threshold for the 45p tax rate to those earning around £62,000. Do you think that'll gain traction?
I can't see that happening. I think it's a pretty strong line that you don't want to cut taxes for people who are perceived to be rich. Outside of London, of course, earning 40, 50 grand is a lot of money. It's a sort of London issue when you're concerned about teachers earning 40, 50 grand. I think it's sometimes a case of the media seeing who's around them rather than seeing who's up in Halifax struggling to get by.
Right, and do you agree with that, Laura, that it is very much a regional debate, if you like, London now being seen as really different in every way to the rest of the UK on the issue of tax as well?
Yeah, I think there is an element of that. Obviously, it is very different around the country, and it's easy for those in politics or the media, God forbid, to forget that there are people much lower incomes outside of here, outside of the capital.
Right. Well, yes. Well, go on.
Oh no, I was just going to say that the Tory party is trying to pitch itself in lots of different. We've had a drive recently for them to make themselves out to be the Workers' Party. They rolled in John Major again to say, look, we can support a working class kid from Brixton and make him Prime Minister. But then there's also the Tory MPs who perhaps come more from the home counties, the shires, who want to keep their core voters happy. It's a difficult balance.
Let's look at the Lib Dem Spring Conference. Obviously lots of fun. Jim, I understand neither of you were there, but you've no doubt had the feed from what happened, particularly over the Nick Clegg leadership issue. What happened there?
Well, so we had Nick Clegg. First of all, his spokesman was asked whether he'd sort of stand down if the Lib Dems weren't in government after 2015. And after a slightly wishy-washy response, we came back with a strong line that Nick Clegg will be there as leader of the Lib Dems until 2020, no matter what happens, which seems pretty unlikely if the Lib Dems aren't in government. And if he stayed on until 2020 and the Lib Dems were in opposition, that would mean he'd been leader of the party for 13 years. I think the public would be absolutely sick of him, and he'd be going out of his mind, being unable to do anything.
Yes, and Laura, I also heard that we'd also had, I mean, if not at the weekend, certainly before, that Nick Clegg's young enough, he can have a second career, possibly back in Europe. I mean, it's all a bit messy, isn't it, over this issue for the party?
Oh, sorry, particularly loud motorbike went past then. I missed the question.
Talking about the Nick Clegg leadership, we've also heard that because he's young, he has a chance of a second career if he didn't want to stay on as party leader. The whole issue has all been a bit messy. It was rather strange they didn't have their ducks in a row ahead of the conference.
Yeah, I mean, and I sort of think it's really it's impossible to speculate at this stage, really, because so many different things could happen. The Liberal Democrats, they could be virtually wiped out at the next election. They could be in coalition with the Conservatives, they could be in coalition with Labour. So who their next leader ends up being depends so much on those different circumstances, whether they're looking to the left, to the right, whether the coalition is seen as a triumph or a disaster. I mean, I'm sure Miriam Clegg would be absolutely delighted if Nick Clegg packed it in, but perhaps she hasn't had to say thus far.
Right, well, and finally, Jim, now that motorbike's finally gone from going up and down behind you, what about the others? What about Alexander?
Well, you've got this odd situation where if you're at the Lib Dem conference last autumn, you'd find that the sort of left wing of the party was pretty quiet. It's sort of a question about whether there's really the supporters for a left-wing Lib Dem candidate. Tim Farron's been positioning himself, but I'm not entirely sure there's the supporter base left for that. There sort of seems to be the economically liberal Lib Dems who are the main ones remaining. And in terms of credible candidates, there's very, very few. And I'd have thought Nick Clegg, if he wants to stay on, wouldn't have any trouble doing that for as long as he wants.
Right, so can we look forward to a list on BuzzFeed of potential Lib Dem leaders later on today?
Well, we'll do our best, but I think it might be a short one.
OK, on that note, crushing note for Jeremy Brown, we will say goodbye.